I welcome you all to the talk on ethical hacking and network security. This talk will be presented by Sachin S. Kamath, who is the offensive security lead at Axiata. This talk is organized by IEEE-IISc Communication Society, that is ComSoc. A brief introduction about us will be presented shortly by Ananta. And this session is recorded, so I request you all to keep your video and audio turned off at all times. If you have any query, feel free to raise your hand and you will be asked to unmute. You can also put up your questions in the chat box. Okay, over to you, Ananta.
Thank you, Devyani. Good evening, everyone. So let's have a brief overview of what we do at the ComSoc. Round the year, ComSoc organizes various events from technical talks to workshops in the field of communication and research in general. Glimpse of few of the events can be seen at the bottom of the slide. Even during the pandemic, the Society hosted various webinars and other virtual events. We invite experts and eminent speakers to deliver talks and conduct sessions to give you an insight on the latest trends of communication. So certainly, ComSoc is doing a lot. So why not be a member of it? Being a member, you can enjoy various benefits, from expanding your social and technical network to staying updated in your field of interest. Mastering the art of organizing events or become a team member. Stand ahead of your peers, add to your technical skills, and get yourself recognized. You may get an opportunity to contribute to presentations and standard developments as well. Also, give a push to your career path to the next level. The membership to IISc ComSoc student chapter is free, and also we have few positions in the executive committee. For IISc ComSoc student chapter membership, please contact Mr. Varki M. John and Ms. Devyani Gupta, Chair and Vice Chair of ComSoc student chapter respectively. Their email addresses are there on the screen. Also, with paid membership of IEEE ComSoc, you can enjoy added benefits by paying a discounted fee of 0.5 USD and for IEEE membership 13.5 USD. For more details, please visit IEEE website. Hope to see many of you become member of IEEE and IEEE ComSoc. Looking forward to active participation from you. Stay connected. Hope you will have an insightful session today. Thank you. Over to you, Devyani.
Okay, thank you, Ananta. Now for our personal records, we would like to know the number of IEEE members attending this talk. So can all the IEEE members quickly raise their hand so that we have a number? So there's an option called raise hand. Can everyone? Okay. I'll wait another 10 seconds to see others respond. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Now you can unraise hand now. And we'll go ahead with our today's talk. So let me introduce the speaker for today's talk. Sachin S. Kamath is the Offensive Security and Threat and Vulnerability Management Team Lead at Axiata, Malaysia, one of the largest holding companies with 11 plus operating companies in Southeast Asia. While he focuses on finding vulnerabilities by attacking the corporate infrastructure, he is also a part of the threat research team. Prior to this, Sachin has led the Red Team operations in EY, Bangalore. During his tenure there, he was successful in compromising the corporate domains of multiple well-established international corporate giants, after which he recommended the best path forward to secure their infrastructure against real threats. During his free time, he develops Black Arc Linux for ARM devices and has developed multiple tools such as NTLM Recon Fedora statistics tool, and contributed to tools like OWASP, OWTF version 2.0. During his open source tenure, he has appeared in multiple talks on security globally, the latest of which is CoCon 2020, one of the largest security conferences in India. I welcome you, Sachin, and over to you now.
Hi, thanks a lot, Devin. Can you all hear me? I am audible, right?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen and give you a little bit of initial introduction and things to do because I'm using a slightly different presentation software this time. So let me know when you can see the screen, please. Yes, let me know. Is it visible right now?
Yeah, we can see your screen now.
Okay, wonderful. So all of you attended the talk, right? I think there are three ways you can go about this. Either you can watch this on Teams, which I'm streaming right now. The second way would be you could go to menti.com and you could enter the screen or the code you're seeing on the screen, right? Which is 45756159. You will be able to follow the presentation alongside. I recommend doing it on desktop because you can copy paste links and paste it if required, save it for later. And that's one way. The other way is I'll also be switching my screens, switching to a browser to show you a couple of videos and a little bit of demo, right? So during that time, I really request you to switch from menti.com browser to Teams, right? So that you can see what is going on the screen. So with that, we'll get started with today's session. And one more thing, I'll just turn off my screen after a little while because my Wi-Fi is down and I'm having on my mobile data, so I'll just save it as much as possible. So with that said, let's move ahead. So who am I, right? So as Devani mentioned, my name is Sachin, and I lead the offensive security team in Axiata Kuala Lumpur, which is a holding company which is based out of Malaysia. Professionally, I fall under a very broad category called purple teamer. So I do something called red teaming, which is basically on the offensive side. But when required, I switch to the other side. So that's called the blue team. Right? I developed Black Hat Linux. You can check out the URL if you download or if you want to, if you're just curious, right? And especially if you have heard about Kali Linux, you should definitely check it out. Other than that, I contribute tools. I've given a bunch of talks. I have the following certifications. And you can find pretty much all my information on this URL, which is https://Kamath.me. So that's my URL. Right? And one more thing before I proceed is that you can see that, if you go to Menti and if you had entered the code 45756159, you already have a Q&A. So if you want to do a Q&A section, you can do it in Menti itself, you prefer. So there is a comment section, and it will comment and you have all the fancy button to react. I also have a Q&A session here. So if you want to ask questions, this would probably come up to me. It should ideally come to me. Otherwise, you can also ask on Teams. I'm watching Teams on my phone as well. Okay, so let's get started. So the agenda, I was told that, I have a mixed bag of audience today, technical people who are just curious about security, and people who signed up also saw that, you had a few bunch of questions to understand what really are you looking out for. Right? So what we have today is like a network plus cloud IP mega crash course, not too detailed because we have a 45-minute window. We'll talk a little bit about APT hacking groups, what they do, what are they after. I'll introduce you to one of the APT attack case studies, which happened which happened quite recently in one of the operating companies. Right? I'll take you through what happened there, the lessons learned. We'll check out how well the internet is doing in terms of security and hygiene. We'll again look at one of the case studies. And then one of the most requested thing that I saw in the response was, okay, this is nice, but how do I become a hacker? Right? So I put together a quick section for people who want to get started in the journey of security. So that's our primary agenda for today. Before we start, disclaimers, however you want to call it. Do not attempt to repeat or replicate anything that is shown in this presentation, right? Because let's face it, we're in India, our cyber laws are not very straightforward. It is illegal to hack systems. It's illegal to even perform certain actions which don't seem illegal, which don't seem dangerous, but they are still illegal. So do not attempt to repeat or replicate. If you do it for research, do it on legal platforms. That I'll get to that in a little while. I'm not responsible for how you process the information, right? The intent of this talk is security research. Views are on my own, and it does not reflect that of my employers. Even though the case studies come from partially from my employer, the views and the things I've said in this presentation all belongs to me. Right? And as always, for educational and research purposes only. So if you say that I taught you to hack, I probably will not go in jail. I'll show them this disclaimer box. So if you are in Menti right now, you would have an interactive quiz which is happening, right? So if you're still not, you still have time to go to menti.com and use the code. So this question is basically, how convinced are you about the following statements? Okay. So the first statement is, most organizations patch latest vulnerabilities in 90 days, right? The second statement is, sophisticated attacker groups' motive is maximum destruction by hacking. The third one is, having an antivirus can prevent people from hacking into a computer. You can go to this URL and you can slide on this on a scale of 1 to 10. It's kind of real time. So we'll see what you think of security. This is optional exercise. Oh, okay. Somebody is sure, very sure that people patch in 90 days. That's good. Okay, I'll give it a couple of more seconds. We have mixed responses here. Somebody is very confident that all the corporates in the world are doing the right job. That's good. It's good to have expectations. Sophisticated attacker group is maximum destruction by hacking. Somebody agrees, somebody disagrees. Okay. All right. So this is what the response is. So we have the general consensus of the audience, right? So just keep these questions in mind. Destruction, creating discussion, having an antivirus. Most organizations patch vulnerabilities in 90 days. Okay, we see more and more people are getting confident. We have 8 votes so far. We'll move on, right? But just keep these ratings in your mind and let me know if you change your mind later. Okay, so welcome to the dark side. So this is essentially, I want to give you a demo of how things are. So this is where I'm just going to turn off my video for better internet. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to reshare another window. So before I start, I want all of you to watch video. Let me know if you get the sound or not, because I'm not too sure if you're going to get the volume. Can you see the YouTube window? I hope you can.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Can you hear the audio?
No, audio I cannot hear. It's
Just give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm trying to figure something out. I have some problems with my system audio, so we'll just skip this part. Right? I'm just going to share my screen again. I was actually really excited. It's a video from Mr. Robot. Right? It's one of my favorite series. Right? Anyway, let me proceed. So anyway, so I've talked about internet, I've talked about devices being on the internet, right? But if you really want to see the gravity of things I'm talking about, you should really explore, some of these platforms like Showdown or Census, right? So these are search engines, right? So when I say search engine, they are like Google. But what they do is they scan each and every device out there on the internet, and it profiles them essentially. So when I say profile for the technical crowd out there, right, what it does is it does something called service discovery to find out what services you're running. Right? So quick primer about internet. So let's say google.com, right? So when you say google.com and you enter google.com, right? So you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff here because obviously there are a lot of servers and then there's a very common one. So, but let's enter something called Apache. So Apache is a web server and we probably all know that it's a web server, right? So as you can see, almost 24 million servers are out there, which is running Apache right now, which is indexed by Shodan. Obviously there is going to be more, right? But it is safe to assume that this is the average count of the internet, right? So we have 24 million servers out there. And then we can see that the Shodan has listed each and every one of it. It's as if it's a Google search result for it, right? So now you go to any of these, and then you can see that there is something called ports, right? And they have something called services, right? So what are these, right? Because these are just IP addresses which are present. So this is a digital asset which is there on the internet, and this is limited in number, and most of you already know that, right? But which each of this IP address which is on the internet, which is a system which is running it, which is going to be either Windows, Linux, Unix, or any other systems out there, right? And for every system to do some sort of an activity, it needs something called ports, right? If it needs to make communication to the outside world, it requires ports. So port number 25 you see here is an SMTP port, right? So that's used to send mail. That's a very old way of sending mail using SMTP port, the standard unlimited SMTP port, right? While you see 53, it's UDP, 53 is DNS, right? It's used to look up what is google.com and make it to IP address. So every system has a port like this, right? So what Shodan does is it does the hard work of scanning each and every IP address out there on the internet, and then figuring out what ports are open, as in what is the service it is using, and then it also tells you what it is, right? So if you look at it, you can see that on port number 443, which is usually used by HTTPS, which is used by Shodan right now as we browse it, right? So the HTTPS protocol, which is used by Shodan, is actually runs on 443, right? And then you can see that there is a server which is running on 443 on this server. It is running Apache because it has done service discovery, right? And then it also knows that it is using an SSL certificate, and there are a lot of details and things like that. So if you look at this, this is a lot of information, right? And Shodan just makes it really easy for you to find this information, right? So let's say I have a vulnerability in SSH right now. I found a very vulnerable 0-day in a protocol called SSH, which is basically used to access servers, right? So all you have to do is come to Shodan and then enter port 22, which is the port which is used by default by SSH, right? There are other ways to find SSH services, but port 22 is the default service, and as you can see, there are almost 19 million servers out there, which runs SSH. So if you say that, let's say I found a vulnerability on Dropbear SSH, like I'm a security researcher, all I need to come and do is come and Shodan. I just need to make the correct search using the label from Shodan, and suddenly I know how many devices I can hack into in the entire world. So today, at this moment, if I research and find out a vulnerability for Dropbear SSH, there are 2 million devices on the internet which I can control. Because if you exploit SSH, what essentially is going to happen is that you're going to get access to the system of SSH, right? Provided you break the functionality and then do whatever. In the end goal is that if you get access to system, 2 million systems on the internet, right, is in fact going to be infected because of the vulnerability. And this is how basic attack methodologies work, right? So it's not like always when somebody gets hacked or when a server gets hacked, it's not like somebody intentionally hacked them because they were so and so. They just search the entire internet for probably an exploit, and we just happen to be one of them. So that's mostly how about 70 to 80% of the attacks work. Like they are untargeted, they just spray and pray across the internet, and somebody gets hit, and it works. Right? So now that you have seen that how attacks work and how attacks usually start or surface or how people find out information, it is time to start talking about something called APT group or advanced persistent threat groups. Right? So what are APT groups? So APT groups are nothing but focused attack groups who are out there in the internet in some corner of the world, who is launching attacks against specific organization or a specific country or a specific entity, right? So it can be something as broad as I'm a threat actor who is attacking a specific country, or I'm just interested in telecommunication, which happens to be one of our areas, right? Because Axiata is one of the primary business of Axiata is telecommunications, and there are APT groups out there whose entire modus operandi, if I may call that, is to attack telecommunication operators and get call records, see if they can get call records of the population and things like that. So that's what APT attackers do. They have very specific interests and they have affiliation. So the top-notch attack groups are all considered to be state-sponsored, as in directly by the government of each of these countries. While some of them also have their own independent hacktivist groups and things like that. So the internet was booming with these activists over the last 10, 15 years, right? So a lot of companies like CrowdStrike and FireEye, what they did was that, we are going to have a standard naming convention for these APT groups. So the next time you hear that, maybe Emissary Panda attacked FireEye, or Emissary Panda attacked this company, by using this convention, you'll know who exactly was the actor, because people don't usually speak about it, right? So this is the naming convention. So if it's Bear, it is originating in Russia, and you have this whole naming convention. There are actually pretty decent sized attack groups in India. So they are all categorized as Tiger, and each of these countries essentially have a animal or a creature associated with it. And then there are also separate tracking for hacktivist groups, which are Jatals. So which are independent groups, which may be international or which may not be specifically to the country, right? So those people are labeled like this. Again, so in the context of today, what happened was that I was reading news. I think just before lockdown, after lockdown, I had nothing to do, so I started reading news a lot. And then I saw that cybercrime rose 400% after COVID-19, right? And I agree, because what suddenly has happened is people have started working from home. You suddenly do not have the luxury of your corporate Wi-Fi gateway protecting you from your virus. You would be very surprised at how much your office Wi-Fi, if any of you start working and then you realize we start blocking you off from threats, right? So what I saw was that it actually rose 400%, and there were attacks coming left, right, and center every day. And even from Axiata's standpoint, right, we have Asia's one of the biggest implementation of monitoring centers, and we were seeing our numbers were spiking because of COVID-19. We had critical attacks coming in every other day. We were having APT groups for breakfast at one point of time. I was joking with one of my friends, right, and I was telling him this is what it is to be like in security, right? You get attacked by nation sponsored attackers, and your job is to fight them off every day. And sure enough, as you can see from this slide, what also happened was that all of these attack APT groups, advanced persistent threat groups, right? They also started using COVID-19 as a theme to lure their candidates, and they started creating documents which were malicious, which had information like COVID vaccine application form and things like that, and people would while people actually open it, it infects them, right? And most of these companies which were interviewed later said that, what, I had a fully updated semantic endpoint solution. I had a fully updated Kaspersky antivirus. I'm not supposed to be calling names, but just any antivirus solution for that matter, right? They just said I had XYZ, and then it still happened, right? So here, I think we'll just take a little bit pause because I've been talking too much, right? You have seen, so this question is basically, you can go to Menti again. This is a word cloud-based question and answer session, right? So you can enter one word on who you think is actually the most powerful one. Bidav, I see a question. How do you fight off an attacker, and how do you identify an attacker with regular access? I will get to you in the upcoming slides. I already have answer for that. Thank you for asking that. That's a great question. Yep. So if you go to menti.com, I believe you can write answers for this, or we can just skip this one. If you want, you can go. There is China, Russia. I can go back to this slide again. This is the one. So Russia, there is Vietnam, there is North Korea, Republic of Korea, hacktivists, Iran, Pakistan, Georgia, India, and there's obviously China, People's Republic of China, So with this, who do you think is like the most powerful this? I think we have one actually, Russia. Russia leads there. Yeah. Yeah, I'll still count that one for Russia. Somebody got too excited. Russia it is. Okay. Okay. So unanimous crowd answer. I will not answer. I will not respond to this. I don't want to make enemies just in case somebody is watching it. But I will let you do the homework and read about APT groups. You can just Google about APT groups. You will find wonderful blogs by companies like Fire and CrowdStrike. I'll leave that to homework just because we have time constraints. So we'll look at how bad is corporate world doing. So right. So if you remember, I had asked you a first question, right? The first statement was a corporate entity usually patches vulnerabilities within 90 days, and most of you said yes, sure, why not? Um, okay, so this is a research from the previous year, right? So this was presented by me last Cocoon conference. I just wanted to bring this in because something very recently happened that shook the internet, at least the corporate security world, right? So I just wanted to show you a case study on how bad was it, right? So what I did was back in 2020 when my talk got accepted for one of the conferences that I studied a study of Fortune 500 companies. From 2020, I took data of their domain names. I did the same process of running reconnaissance, and any attacker would do. I did a full reconnaissance against them to identify if they would actually have any sensitive assets, right? And then what I saw was that 62.7% of the companies actually had a potentially vulnerable service or protocol which was exposed. Maybe a web application, an old web application, or a server which was forgotten, backup servers or exposed files. 62.7% of the Fortune 500. I'm not even speaking about small cap. I'm not even speaking about Indian companies or any other companies. These are Fortune 500 companies, right? 62.7% of them. And 42% of the servers leaked potentially sensitive information. So there were at least 42% of the server of the companies. I'm sorry, it's not 42% of the 62.7% of the companies who had servers potentially leaked sensitive information on the servers. I can see another question in the chat. Just hold on, give me a second. But they can also hide their location to be found, right? That's correct. That's actually very true, right? And that's why we have dedicated thread groups. So I believe this is in the context of mapping thread groups using it's so if your question is are they just using IP addresses to map these threat actors, then the answer is no. The categorization is much more. So there are dedicated threat hunting teams which large organizations have. So what they do is they kind of do analysis on all these files which are used by these attackers. They read the comments, they look at the coding style, they look at the active time, and then they correlate a lot of information they get about these attackers, and then they take a very educated guess on where this attacker could have been. Because and there is also deception. Some attackers, what they do is they might be Russians, right? But they would intentionally put Chinese time zones or Chinese comments in their files. It's a cat and mouse game, right? Nobody knows for sure who's who, but it's all a best guess. But our advances has been significant, and we can at least nowadays confirm that these threat groups in fact belong to a country, because we have seen patterns, geopolitical patterns, which actually match what security experts think the location is. Does that answer your question, Shankar? Okay, wonderful. And so this was the statistics, right? And just 2 days back, I was reading news. I was having a fresh cup of coffee in the morning. I'm so used to calling it coffee. Sorry. And then what happens is there is a Microsoft Exchange server attack. So to give you a perspective, Microsoft Exchange is this very old server, self on-prem server that you could run on your own internal server, and you could use mail. So if you're any of you are from the corporate world, right, you would know you have OVA, Outlook web application, which is basically used to send and receive mails. Most of it is in Office 365 right now, which is in the cloud. But a lot of organizations had these, right? So if you go to Showdown, I'll leave the exercise to you. You can find out how many Exchange servers were out there. right? But what F-Secure says is that they are being hacked faster than we count, right? So this is the exact research. So I did a research on Exchange servers 2020 back, and there were millions of them out there, right? And then a disaster strikes in March 22, 2021. You would be surprised at the number of servers which were still out there who are vulnerable. I would give the homework to you because I have showed you the URL at showram.io. You can do the math of checking out how many servers were out there, but it was a disaster, right? And what usually happens is that if you hack Exchange servers, it's one of the critical crown jewels of your corporate assets. So if your mail servers are hacked, your business is suddenly in critical danger because mail servers are very high privileged, one thing in your corporate environment. And the second thing is that mail servers are actually hold key to your mails, which contain sensitive internal information, right? So where's the problem, right? So you asked me what is the problem? How do we fix this? So the first thing is that the attack complexity is increasing day by day, right? And you do not have enough talent in cybersecurity to deal with the scale of attacks which is happening right now. And I can vouch for the fact that because I am seeing attacks every day, and I can see that how helpless defense people are sitting because the volume is too high, and the technology is way too made to capture good attacks. I mean, there is good technology out there, but it's simply not good enough to stop the scale of this attack of this sort, right? And then biggest problems out there is that top-notch security costs a lot of money. Even if it's a simple solutions like EDR, because I told you antivirus doesn't work. Antivirus is pure signature based. If I make one change to a virus, boom, it bypasses antivirus, right? So there are solutions like an EDR, which is called an endpoint detection and response. But that level of security costs a lot of money. And that's a stopper because a lot of people can't afford it, right? And one of the reasons we have security issues is because development and security did not go hand in hand back then, right? Everything was copy pasted from Stack Overflow or for some blog. We still do, right? I still do. I go to Stack Overflow, I find something, still copy paste stuff. Right? That's how development was done. So security was inherently not part of development. So that's the problem that we have here, and that's a very big problem because security is not going to go away anytime soon, and we do not have enough people to handle the scale because there is blockchain coming in, and you need to look at blockchain security. Right? Who's going to look into all of this thing? So if there is not enough people to look into these things, the world is going to go into darkness, and I can guarantee that. And we're already seeing signs of it, right? You have been seeing news of companies getting hacked every other day, so I think you kind of understand, right? So this is a investigation very dear to me. This happened. I can't reveal when was this, but this was an investigation very dear to me. So what happened was that one of the clients that I have been working for, they got hacked, and I was doing the investigation to figure out how it happened, right? And this is where somebody had in fact asked, how do we do it, right? So this is how it started. So one of these advanced persistent threat groups, unknown, we don't know the affiliation yet, they hacked one of the government websites of a country. It's a very critical website, and it belongs to the government, and it was hacked. And what happened was that they used the email servers of um, that government to send malicious emails inside the network of the client. Right? So what happened was that the mailbox it arrived in Office 365, and because the employee was using Outlook mail client, it got sent right to his mailbox. And because of COVID, everybody is working from home. So the employee is essentially in his virtual LAN, which is basically the small network we have for VPN, right? So what happened was that it got synced, and it basically said that there was a warrant against this person, and the person has to come before court. And what happened was that the person, in fact, what he did was he opened the document because it came from a very legitimate email address, and the person knows that it is legitimate email address. So he or she opened that email address. And what happened was that once the email was, in fact, opened, it established connection to a remote CNCP, which is Command and Control Center, which happened to be another compromised server of another client, right? So they had already hacked one other big company, and they were using one of their servers to break into one of ours, right? So it was establishing a connection to that server and was downloading malicious scripts from there. And once the attacker downloaded the malicious scripts, uh, this case belongs to NHAI. No, it doesn't. Man, even if it does, I wouldn't be telling you, right? So it downloaded all these files, and then there was about 19 GB of data which was exfiltrated to Dropbox. So it contained sensitive files of the employee. There were a lot of official sensitive documents and all these things, right? So at this point, I would bring your attention to the point two that you saw in the introduction slide, right? So hackers may usually break into cause damage. Here it was not the case. If the attacker wanted, they could have just planted a ransomware, broken into the network, and decapacitated the entire domain. But that was not the case. Their MO was straightforward, right? You come into the laptop, you find the person who's most likely to have a lot of information, you infect them and take out all the data that they have, right? Sometimes that information itself is a lot of wealth for APT attack groups. See, because if it was anybody who was after money, they would have just used a ransomware and locked out systems, right? And then that's easy money for them if the company is willing to pay. But if that is not the case, just stealing documents from just one specific person's laptop. So this is why I'm telling you, right? It's not always about destruction of money, because we are in the world of data, and data speaks a lot. So if you can get customer data or data of your customers or credit card information, that's worth quite a lot. So this was the whole case study which happened. Sorry to interrupt. Today we have these two authentication methods. Could you please touch upon their reliability? Again, good question. I have slides on this one. I'll get to that. So basically, learnings from this, right? There is nothing called perfect security, because if you look at the security poster of this organization, it was top notch, right? See, there is always top notch is always relative, but again, it was very good standards according to industry level standards. Security is always about risk reduction, right? You cannot secure everything. You cannot say that I am 100% secure. I cannot be hacked. You can always be, right? And there is no one silver bullet to stop all attacks. And this is more or less for learning, it's more of a problem, right? There is no one-stop solution for all your security needs, right? And then logging, monitoring, hardening of systems is important, because you need to monitor all the activities. The attackers will be trying to do stuff. You would be curious as to how we detected it, right? Because we had endpoint solutions, we had security solutions which detected some of the malicious activities, and then we did forensics and find out. So that's why logging, monitoring, and hardening of all the systems is very important, right? And one of the weakest link in security is humans. It's not devices. So if you go back, why do weak passwords exist, right? Because humans set it up. Um, and why did this attack essentially become successful, right? Because if you look at it, it was number one. From number two to number three, it was a mail delivery. If the employee had not opened that mail, this attack would not have happened, right? And none of this would have happened. So if you look at it, the weakest link in security is always going to be human. And trust, and humans are obviously not as capable, because we tend to make mistakes. So and then you should like, but why should I care? You're talking only about corporates, right? But this is not the case. But imagine the companies I'm talking about is a Fortune 500 company. If somebody can break into them in a matter of hours, imagine how much time it would take to break into your system, into your stuff, and you wouldn't even probably know if somebody breaks into your laptop, right? If that doesn't give you sleepless nights, I don't know what will, because I just told you, right? And I can confirm for the fact that having an antivirus does not do anything, at least on a corporate level. But on your system, it can stop. On an endpoint system, it can stop up to 85 to 90% of the common attacks, right? Because it's mostly going to be already used virus, which are seen somewhere, and all these signatures should already be there, right? So this is why you should care, right? Your accounts can be used to commit crimes. So even you may get hacked, but let's say if your account is being used, and if you can't prove that you are not hacked, then you are the one who's going to go to jail and not the person who did the crime, right? Financial and reputational loss. Nowadays, our photos are on Google, our mail is on Gmail, or any other place for that matter. One person gets access to your Google account, and then you know what's going to happen. I don't have to tell you. And then, but again, prevention is better than cure. So if you still think that, okay, let's see, maybe if I get hacked one day, I'll be serious, then you're probably doing it the wrong way, right? And then you can probably ask, okay, but what can I do, right? So one of the most simple and one of the most easiest thing is explained by one of my favorite things in the world. It's an XACD, right? So what it essentially does is that this comic is essentially about how we have trained humans to actually remember easy passwords, which are actually easy for a computer to crack. So your TR0UB4DOR ampersand 3 might look like a very strong password in the beginning, right? But if somebody gets a hash, or somebody, let's say, if you had used a password like this, and if a website gets hacked, it takes minutes to crack passwords like this with the computing power we have these days, right? So that's why we should increase the odds, right? So if you look at the fourth word, it's like correct, horse, battery, stupid, right? That itself is apparently, it's actually good enough for cracking, right? But make sure you don't use dictionary words as shown here, because this comic is a little bit old, and we have systems which use dictionary words and make phrases like these. So make sure it's something personal, maybe in your mother tongue, right? And just English. I said when I write Hindi, I write English, right? So you write something like that, it's going to be virtually impossible to crack your password, right? So the next time you set up TR0UB4, instead think of something as random as, let's say, parallel lines don't intersect, or sun does not set in the west. I mean, that's a equally strong password, and then easier to remember, and then you don't have to, memorize, or just better yet, use a password manager. A lot of solutions out there. There are things like LastPass. There is an open source one called Bitwarden, which is free and open source. It's free to use. Right? Always use password managers, because they generate strong passwords for you, and then they take care of you. You just have to take care of that one strong password that you have to set, right? The second one is, again, as I told you, humans are the weakest link, so do not share your stuff with anybody, right? Again, a wonderful XKCD, which basically says, his laptop's encrypted, let's build $1 million cluster to crack it. No good, it's 4096-bit RSA. And then it's like, you know what, never mind, you just buy a $5 wrench and beat them and replace the password. Right? So as you say, humans are always vulnerable, right? So make sure you're always on high alert. Just don't open mails that you don't want to read. Or it's fine reading opening mails, but just don't open attachments. Or at least, even if you open attachments, don't, just for this love of God, don't click enable content, right? It's not worth it. And then somebody was asking about duo authentication methods, right? Always use MFA, because what usually happens, I'll tell you why multi-factor is a good answer, right? Because if you are like me, who doesn't want to use a password manager, and then who likes to still remember passwords or use patterns, um, I don't I don't mind, right? But as long as you have enabled two-factor. What two-factor essentially does is added layer of protection. As somebody asked, there was duo authentication, right? So what essentially happens is that your web application provider, let's say like a Facebook or Gmail, what they'll decide is we want to provide additional security to our users, right? So they will tie up with these third-party organizations to provide two-factor tokens. So this could be Duo, which could be a third party, or it could be completely free two-factor service, right? You have Google Authenticator, you have Authy, which is for two-factor, right? So you use that, and then even if your password is stolen, people can essentially log into your account because you still need that two-factor code, and you can't brute force it because you get locked out, right? So this is why it works, right? Because if you're like me, if you use Sachin at the rate Gmail 123 as password, and then you for Facebook, maybe if you go and say Sachin at the rate Facebook 123, and then maybe you go to some other website and then you say Sachin at YouTube 123 or whatever, right? So things like that. What usually happens is, when, let's say, what happened is LinkedIn got breached a while back and all your passwords got leaked, right? So if you're using a password which was being used in LinkedIn that time back, or if your password was something like, Sachin at the rate LinkedIn or something like that, right? Your chances are that the attacker would programmatically do something called a password stuffing and then try these passwords against various services and see if they can get access. Like, this is one of the most cleverest way to actually get attacked, right? So maybe in the middle of the night, if you say that a new login detected from somewhere, it probably means that somebody did a password stuffing attack on your account and they were successful, right? So this is how it usually works. Would you recommend any password managers? How? Yeah, it depends on what you're. I really like Bitwarden because it's free and open source. You can host it on your own. I personally use LastPass because I've been just using it for very long and too lazy to migrate away. But Bitwarden is really good. Um, Bitwarden is a good password manager that I have used and I would recommend it. Right? It quickly brings us to the last section, how to be a hacker 2021 edition. So your chair is a very strict person. So he told I have strict timelines. So I'll just skip through this. Right? So learn the CS basics. Obviously, it's very important if you want to, especially get started in network security. Right? You need to learn networking. That's a no-brainer. Right? So OSLAS protocols, communications, TCP/IP. Then you need to learn application layer basics like how DNS works, ARP, told SMTP, which is the mail protocol. Right? Then you take up and learn something like a Linux operating system. Right? You can start with an operating system like Kali, BlackArch, Parrot OS, a bunch of options for you out there. Choose what you're more comfortable. But if you are beginning out, I would really recommend starting off with a OS like Kali and then moving on. Are organizations implementing the culture of DevSecOps equally vulnerable to other organizations? It actually depends. That's a good question. So what usually is happening is that the general trend that I'm seeing is that the more and more customers are moving towards cloud and making sure that they implement the cloud controls, defaults, and everything given by the vendor themselves, if it's Microsoft, right? Then what I'm seeing is that they are generally becoming way secure than if they do things on their own, right? And adding DevSecOps into that may or may not be working. It all depends on again how they have set it up, right? But as a general rule of thumb, if you're doing stuff right, you should be getting in better place, right? So if DevSecOps is the right thing, and if you're doing DevSecOps the right way, then you should be moving forward, right? Because very recently we did a red team, and then we saw that there was we actually managed to compromise an entire Git server, which was not managed properly. There was a misconfiguration, and then we managed to get into the entire DevSecOps chain, and then we were able to control an application starting. So we were able to push a sample backdoor into a code, and that went all the way to production, and we were able to control it, right? And it was a pretty mature organization. So it doesn't matter how you do it. If you do things right, you will move forward. Um, I think that's. I know doesn't answer your question, but that's generally how it is, right? Get familiar. Okay, so moving on. So what you do is get familiar with the Linux command line. You need it because most tools are written for it. If you want to do like a map, right, it's all written for the command line. So get familiar with that, and obviously learn a programming language because you can't be doing things manually forever and ever. So just learn a programming language. Maybe Go. If you're just starting off and starting to learn something new, I would really recommend starting off with C or C++ if you want to gain the foundations, right, of CS, and then you can move on to other languages. If you want to pick up a high-level language, I really recommend Python. Python is good. I That is my go-to as well. There are beautiful new languages like Go, which is sponsored by Google now, and then there is a programming language called Rust, which basically says that it's the best. So a lot of options for you out there. Feel free to take up any programming language as long as you learn something and you can implement something in it. It's all good. Uh, Start small. Once you do that, you can learn. You can go to a website like cybrary.it and then start learning the basic stuff, right? Okay, how does this work? How does a web application work? How do I start testing web applications? Cybrary IT is a wonderful repository. I believe it's all free. You have wonderful courses. I really recommend checking it out. You start off with Hack the Box and Try Hack Me. So these are some websites which actually would let you practice what you have learned, right? So they have vulnerable machines which are vulnerable intentionally. So it's a lab environment where you can practice your skills and get better, right? So I would really recommend testing that out. And one of the biggest things always to do is follow security people on Twitter, probably not Facebook, right? Wherever you have a Mastodon, if you're into those sort of things, and then read a lot of blog posts, see what new open source tools are coming. Just keep an eye out. Just add alerts for open source release and things like that on Google Alerts, right? Start writing small. automation tools, right? So whenever you see that, you have come across a problem and then you see that nobody has written a tool for it, why don't you take initiative and start writing a tool and then just open source it, right? You never know, maybe it will click, maybe those people will start using it, it will get bigger, you never know, right? And then, as always, contribute to other open source software. There are wonderful, wonderful tools out there, right? I personally contribute to Black Arch, which is basically an OS which is built for penetration testers, right? But just start using tools. See what is missing in the tools you like, and if you know if it's a programming language that you have learned, always just feel free to go and collaborate and make the tool better. And it's always possible in open source world, right? Um, and then obviously once you're done, we have come to almost the end, right? So level up and choose path. So once you're comfortable at that class, then you need at that class of things, right? When you are familiar with basic security concepts, then you can start to diverge, right? You can take an offensive route, like I chose to date. Like I used to do red teaming, where it's basically about trying to break into a company with zero information. It's basically like you are being in a APT group. So you have to think like an attacker, act like an attacker, make sure you don't get caught, and things like that. So that's red teaming. Threat simulation is basically the same thing, but with knowledge of the company, right? And then you do application testing, you can do bug bounty and stuff like that. Defensive, it's again blue teaming. You start monitoring, you start defending, you start doing forensics to see if you can actually uh, find what happened. So it's like Sherlock, the last point for a forensic investigator, that is, right? Or you can be the full stack security guy, be the purple guy, or be a reverse engineer, rip apart software and hardware, right? And then maybe also forensic investigator, the last one. It's probably the most interesting one, where you start investigating cyber crimes. You connect dots and then figure out what happened. So that specifically involves things like threat hunting, where you actually actively look for threats and things. So there are a lot of things to do in cyber, and not enough people do it all, right? So lots and lots of opportunities in cyber, right? So here I think we have run short on time. So I think just one line quote I would like to put here, right? So where there is suffering and struggle, there is learning, right? So if you don't stop learning, and if you do cybersecurity is really not that hard to get into. It's just that you have to be curious, you have to have the out of the box thinking capabilities, and you just have to always question why everything exists, right? So let's say tomorrow you go and click a button and then it does something else. Then you should be curious, okay, what if I click it twice? What if I don't click it at all? What if I leave it forever? What happens, right? It's all about curiosity. See if things break when you do it a certain way. And that's pretty much the gist of it. So I hope this session was at least a little helpful to you in understanding. 1 hour, unfortunately, is a little too short, right, to give you a gist of all the things. So I put together real world scenarios to probably get you inspired in security. I hope this was helpful, right? We're just in time for Q&A. I think we can take questions right now. And I will stop presenting right now.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin, so much for the wonderful talk. I really hope this would have provided beautiful insights to people working on security, and would have also intrigued others as well. So we have three more questions, I think, that you had skipped in
Yeah.
the chat section. You can quickly answer them, then we'll switch to other questions that were asked in the Google form.
Yeah. Okay, so for chat, I think sometimes hackers could mimic the website trying to fool the users. So for a common user, they might not be aware any safeguarding tips on the scene. It's essentially just don't click on links what you don't know about, right? It's very straightforward. So if you get a mail saying that you have a PayPal account transfer pending, why do you want to click on that link? You can just go to paypal.com, log into your account, and click notifications, right? Do not click on links that you don't believe in. Otherwise, just verify, or always look for what do you call it? These typos like paypal.com. It's basically very simple. It's basically what your bank says. Always verify. They never ask you for OTPs, PIN cards, and even when the website is mimicking, what usually happens is that the SSL certificate may be expired, or even if there is an SSL certificate, it might not be belonging to the actual member. So always, as a rule of thumb, just whenever you want to go to a website, just always take the trusted links or type the URL yourself. I think that's one good way to go about it. I told you there is no one silver bullet. Like there is no one solution which can stop people from cloning websites, right? Um, should everybody use Tor protocol for all queries from their devices? Any alternatives? It depends on if you're really paranoid or not, right? If you are a person who is worried about your ISP or your internet service provider watching your traffic, then you should definitely be using Tor, right? And as a matter of fact, to give you a perspective, I'm not taking names, but a very big telecom provider was caught trying to do something called packet sniffing to find out if people are actually using VPN or to see what is behind your HTTPS traffic. Like they were doing something called SSL offloading, where even if your traffic was encrypted, theoretically they could still see some bits of your traffic, right? So telecom provider was caught doing that in India. So if you are very paranoid and if you have something to hide from the government, or if you're just very too finicky about your privacy, I think using Tor is a good idea. But use it responsibly. Don't use it for bad. So yeah,
Uh, all
one
right.
more. Yeah, yeah. I have I think two more questions. I can just quickly take them. What is the best way to open a file securely? Depends on what file it is. As a rule of thumb, if you don't know what the file is, you shouldn't probably open it, right? If it's coming from a trusted source, you should still probably open. And especially if it's a Word document or if an Office document, I cannot stress enough. If you see a .b macro, right? It's XLB macro or XLSB or XLSMB, things like that. Do not open macro files unless you know it is actually legit, because we do not have legitimate use of macros in everyday life except for people who do heavy Excel calculations and stuff, right? So as a rule of thumb, avoid Office files if possible. What is best way to open file? Okay, any comments on WSL? It's getting there. It's not there yet. It's getting better. How secure is incognito? You shouldn't be using it if you want security. I mean, essentially, incognito, all it does is it stops your history from coming in your browser, right? It doesn't add any layer of security unless you're using a browser like Brave, which has an inbuilt open incognito with Tor, which is secure.
Okay. Thank you, Sachin. If there are any more questions, we'll take them in a little while. So we had previously circulated a Google form in which we had given the opportunity to participants and registrants to ask their queries.
Mhm.
So we'll go through them and then we'll come back to the any live Q&A session. Yeah. So this was the very first question asked.
What do you mean by offensive? It's literally what you do offensive, right? When you want to punch someone, you punch them offensively. So you do the same thing in terms of cyber. You break them. So when you say offensive security, it essentially means that you are doing the exact same things as a bad guy is doing, except the fact that you're not spreading harm, but you are still breaking into systems, making it all the way. You're free to do whatever you want as long as you don't cause a financial loss or bring down systems, right? You are free to do anything other than that in something like an offensive security or offensive writing assessment to break into a company. So that's why offensive. So anything that requires breaking, be it the application or anything else, it comes to my team. So that's why it's called the offensive security team.
Next two is how to become an ethical hacker.
So pretty much the same thing. Don't do black stuff. Don't do bad stuff, and follow whatever I said, and you will be on your way. See, there is no shortcut, right? You just keep learning a little bit every day and hope that you learn enough in enough time. That's how you become a hacker. But with enough time and with enough knowledge, right? Once you start learning through all these resources, start practicing more in platforms like Try, Hack Me, or Hack the Box, you will understand what it's about more and more, right? I cannot explain what security is to you. You have to have the experience of it and then do it hands-on to understand what it's really like to be, to grow. So I would leave that drill to you if you're interested.
Okay.
What are the best careers that can be chosen in the security field? every career is best, something exciting in cybersecurity, right? It really depends on what you like to do. Um, I like security as a whole, so I sort of do it full stack. I do defense and offense, right? But some people are like, I like ARM exploitation, or I like hacking hardware, right?
Mm.
I know at least one person in this call who is an expert hardware hacker, or at least way more than I know, right? So there are people with varied interests, right? So if you're interested about knowing about stuff, you just research in that field and then you get better. So best career wise, there is nothing, but I think all security careers eventually end at chief information security officer role. I think that's highest you can get in terms of at least the corporate chain, chief information security officer or chief cybersecurity officer in terms of career. But if you're choosing research, then the possibilities are endless.
Okay, this is, I think, continuation to.
It's pretty much, yeah. So simple steps is again the simple. I literally had a step called simple steps, right? You learn, you practice every day, you watch videos, you put them in practice, you will get there. Trust me, you will. Even if you think that you're not making progress, you in fact will be better than at least majority of the so-called security people out there. Just put in your efforts, be genuine, do not try to faff about things, and you'll be good to go. And you just take the steps. You start with a company, you take on certification, security paths, right? And then that's how you build a career.
Mm.
The most technically sound way to get into cyber, how does one gain experience, what is the fastest growing field in cybersecurity? Okay, it's a lot of questions. Technically sound way to get into cybersec. There is no. I actually know somebody who got into cyber from biology. So there is nothing called technically sound. It's just up to how passionate you are, right? But technically sound way would be, if you ask me to start off as an absolute beginner in fresher, would be to start looking at, start participating in capture the flag competitions. It's called CTF. Just Google about it, or just do hack the box. Start with basic certifications like CEH, get the knowledge, and then go for a little hands-on certifications like OSCP, which requires you to give a 48 hours proctored exam and things like that, right? So you take baby steps like that, and then gain experience that way. Fastest growing field. There is nothing like fastest growing subfield in cybersecurity, because cybersecurity goes hand in hand with your technological pace. The faster your IT grows, the faster the cyber grows, right? Because with every digital asset which is introduced right now, all the way from your TVs to all the way to your fridges, everything is on the internet, and every device needs security, right? So security is growing as fast as the digital world, right, is the answer.
Okay.
Cannot any person himself from financial fraud, digital platforms, manufacturers. Maximum caution. See, I told you, right? Be very careful. People do. I've heard of things like it's some things are very clever. People send you a link and then you have to enter your UPI. Just believe that you never have to enter your UPI ID to send money, right? So it's basic common sense. Just listen to what your bank has to say. Just read basic security tips, right? I mean, I don't want to sound like a bank giving you basic tips like do not share your OTP. All these things are
Yeah.
already known. I mean, if you have your basic, if your basic things are right, I think you're good to go. How can you be truly private while accessing internet? Truly private is highly debatable. Um, Considering where we are right now. But using Tor, randomizing your MAC address, um, and then using multiple hop proxies before jumping into a Tor network. So doing basic things, you can be reasonably private. And when I say reasonably, I put reasonably in air quotes. You can never be truly private on the internet.
Okay. This is the last question.
Yeah. Can adding security level increase the access time or latency? If so, how can we pinpoint the activity that causes the see, anything you add to a source code in the end is a bunch of jump instructions in the memory, right? Or jump instructions or instead of instructions. So anything you do on top of your development as security is going to be an overhead, right? but we just have to make sure that's an overhead that we're ready to take, because let's say, and that's what most of these companies do as risk analysis. They just see that if we don't implement it, what is our worst loss? And if we implement this, is it going to be worth it to prevent this loss and things like that, right? So, but essentially, yes, security does add overhead to things, but I believe it's a necessary evil, right? It's basically like, does a tap slow the water coming from my tank? Why don't I just have one pipe alone, not have a tap, right? It's just because you can have a, so not a good analogy, but still, right? I think that it's still something that you absolutely need, without which the system is going to break down. If you don't have a tap in your bathroom is going to flood. It's as simple as that, right? So it's like that. It's a necessary evil, if I may call that.
Okay. Thank you. Now I think I'll go to see if there are any more questions in the chat box. Yeah, so Vidav has asked a question.
Okay. Any books to start reading, learn the tools of hacking, or any specific author or blogger? A lot, actually. So I don't really want to recommend blogs or authors, but what you can do is you can go to Cybery, or you can just go to GitHub, right? So what I'll be doing after this call is I'll be compiling a whole bunch of resources and sending it over to our team and the organizing team, right? So they'll share that email forward with you. So I'll make sure to include a few resources here that you can refer to.
Okay. So are there any more questions from the audience?
No problem. Thank you.
And all right, there are no questions in YouTube live as well. So,
Okay.
all right, okay. So, thank you again, Sachin, for sparing some time from a busy schedule. And on behalf of our IISc IEEE ComSoc, kindly accept this virtual memento from our end.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really, this is really sweet. Thank you so much.